Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the interview. We are now in part two of Willow Grace's author interview on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. Now, in this segment of the interview, we'll be now focusing on the business side of being an author. And if you remember the last episode, we were just beginning to talk about that when it comes to which route for publication, whether independent, traditional, or hybrid. And now we're going to talk about the audience, which is very, very important to the author. Now, Willow, for you, how important is it for an author to really understand who their audience is? And do you have a good understanding of who your audience is for your debut novel?
So I definitely do think that is very important to understand the audience that you're writing to. Not only because it helps you craft compelling characters, but also because when you're going through and trying to get certain themes across that you want people to be able to understand, you need to make sure you know what kinds of people are going to be reading your work. So for me personally, I had to go through and do a little bit of research into my genre and to understand what kinds of characters were already existing. And that helped me figure out what I felt was lacking in those characters. So that's how I was able to hopefully create very compelling characters that people can empathize with. Because if they're not interested in your characters, they aren't as interested in your story. And I also think even in that, I feel as if I do have a relatively good understanding of my audience because I know who I'm writing to. I feel like as if I'm writing to people who need a little bit of an escape into the fantasy world, but they also kind of need a helping hand to show them that they're not alone. And so I craft characters and a story that could do that. Those are the people I'm writing to. And of course, if I reach, broader audiences, that's perfect. But I know who I'm writing to.
Definitely. And still on the topic of audience, a good friend of mine actually brought up this discussion that when it comes to, writing books, especially as a debut author, we always want to write in the genre that we are most comfortable in. But she actually brought up a different plot point, which is it's not incidentally bad, or let me rephrase it. It's always good to write in your genre, your interests, but also take in consideration that people within the audience that you're writing for may not be at the high fantasy or really complex science fiction worlds that you have written in or are comfortable writing in. Sometimes it's good to write like an introduction into the fantasy genre, the science fiction genre. And that was a very interesting point because it is true. When we're writing our books, we really have to take into consideration, okay, this could be a book for somebody who's never read fantasy at all. And this is their introduction or science fiction. So for you, Willow, would you classify your debut novel as a sort of introduction into the science fiction fantasy genre for someone who has not read either?
Yes and no. Yes, because I will have a little snippet of something in the very beginning of the book that's not only telling you how to pronounce all the names, because I do follow in the fantasy genre of you have no idea how to pronounce people's names. So I'm going to have a little pronunciation guide there, but I also am going to have in there a little bit of a description of the world that I've built, so to speak, and the culture of the people that our main character is going to go spend time with. And I think for those who have never read fantasy or science fiction before, that's probably a little bit of something that they will need. Because those of us who have been reading this genre, we already know we're not going to know the names. We aren't going to know how to pronounce it. We're going to come up with our own pronunciation. And we're kind of already ready for the cultures to be different, unlike anything that we expect. And we're coming to different civilizations. But to those who are being introduced into science fiction fantasy, they're probably not expecting that. So I'll have a little bit of an introduction there. It's still going to be slightly difficult for somebody who doesn't usually follow those genres because I very much stick to the genre. But I think it's a nice segue. It's a nice way to be like, oh, I kind of enjoy this. Maybe this is something you need. I don't know so much as a introduction, but maybe a segue into it.
Okay, all right. And now another question, which I think is very important, which I've talked on the past, which is, who are the authors who have inspired us? But I've changed the question a little bit in response to a guest I had on the show earlier this year. And what he brought up was that for all debuting authors, we're always inspired by, the titans of the past, the people who have inspired us and who molded us. But this is where it got interesting. He said that for the reader who picks up our book or who picks up a book in Barnes & Noble or bookstore, sometimes they'll always have the tagline, the next so-and-so. Now, from the reader's perspective, that is very good because it gives an idea of what to expect. But from an author's perspective, that's not really very good because it's kind of pigeonholing us into one category or one type of style of writing. What if you want to go into, let's say, the thriller genre, the mystery genre, and, people are like, oh, but you're like so-and-so, you're the next. I'm not trying to be the next anybody. I'm trying to be me. Yes, these authors inspired me and helped me craft my voice, but I'm not trying to replicate their styles of writing. I'm not trying to be an imitator that I can write, like Tolkien. Nobody can write like Tolkien the way he crafts his words, or C.S. Lewis, or George R. R. Martin. Nobody can match him, or even Frank Herbert's Dune. I mean, those stories are like areas of their own. They're like beyond anyone to like replicate or imitate. So I was wondering if I can get your thoughts on that discussion where, yes, we do want to show the books who inspired us and show the authors who've inspired us to our readers in our bios, but we also don't want to be imitators or replicators of the styles of writing because for all authors, we're trying to get our voice out there. We're trying to show our individuality.
Yes. I definitely agree to that very, very much. I definitely have those authors and those books that I drew inspiration from, but I did what I could to make it my own in this novel. And I think for the most part, what I'm trying to do to set myself apart from other authors is to see where the genre is lacking, like I've said in the past, is to see when I read all these books, I know they're in this genre. I'm used to them being in this genre because I see XYZ tropes in every single one. But what are things that I feel like I'm not seeing as much of that could be a really good topic? So that's what I try to do to set myself apart. And I think there's something to being compared to a certain author that's wildly successful. But that's also not something that, like you said, I don't want to be the next blah, blah, blah.
Right.
I find someone saying, oh, if you read this book, this author, I could compare them to blah, 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 blah author that I love. That's fine, because that kind of gets people an idea of what I'm writing. But I'm not the next so-and-so. I'm comparable to so-and-so, but I'm not that next author. I'm myself, and I want to connect my readers individually as an author so they know my name and not, well, this book was written by an author like.
Right. Definitely. And that's actually what another guest said on the show not too long ago, where he wanted to write, a clean, traditional, classic Heroes Quest story like Tolkien, like Lord of the Rings, but not be like Tolkien. To be like, as you said, if you're fans of this book, you may like this book because it has all these, tropes or themes that are in the story, which is, very fine. It's nice to be compared to somebody, but we don't want to be that somebody because we're all trying to be our own, individuals. And then that kind of goes back to, the audience again, like what kind of audience are we really writing towards? And then fine tuning that even more is the readership, because at the end of the day, who's going to pick up our books? Who's really going to read our books? And the reason I bring this up is that I'm sure you'll agree, Will, that there are books that are marketed to one age group that upon reading, they're like, this needs to be in the different category.
Yeah.
Case in point, I've had one author said that they read a book that was marketed for young adults. Now, for those who don't know young adults is, as it said, it's not, new adult or adult. It's literally young adult. That means the language is going to be different. The writing style is going to be slightly different. It's not meant to be very complex or sophisticated.
Yes.
It's meant to be, an introduction into, that genre.
Yes.
And they said it had a lot of spice in the young adult genre, which that is another discussion entirely. So I think you may have already answered this in the authorship question, but I was wondering for you, how did sort of like you really kind of balance your writing to where it does fit the readership / audience that you are working towards?
So a little bit of that, I think, comes into the complexity of the themes that I have, not only with the characters, but with the book as a whole, because there's a lot of complex themes that if you look for it, you'll find it, and you'll have that oh moment once you realize what it is. I think, too, the amount of exploration I do into emotions that are associated with trauma and grief, that's not really something that a young adult audience can understand. That's typically more so something that you probably look back on and say, wow, I experienced some trauma. And so that's more so for the adult audience to read that and understand those themes. I do think, though, I did what I could to keep the writing sophisticated enough that an adult feels like they're reading an adult novel, but also an easy enough read that if you're not somebody who sits down and reads books like the Lord of the Rings series or the Game of Thrones, like if you're not somebody who reads that, you can still sit down and read this. You're still reading the novel, but it's an easy enough novel to read that if you don't usually do that, you can still get tied into this and not feel like you're like, okay, there's so many words. I have to write down a list of words I don't understand so I can look them up. You don't have to do anything like that with this one, I feel like. So
right.
I think that's kind of how I tried to still have this book something that an adult audience can read, but something that's easy enough for them to consume, that they're going to understand the storyline, and they're going to understand the themes and messages I'm getting across.
Definitely. And now we arrive at probably the most very interesting question of the business portion and overall the interview. It's probably one of my favorite questions. So I'll give a little context for this one, Will, because it's a big one. All right. And here it is. So, doing podcasting now for about 2 years, I've had the opportunity to meet a wide range of different authors and learning about their experiences. And from what I've learned from these interactions, that there's really two paths for an author, and that is to be an author and to be known as an author, which are two very, very different things. To be an author is an individual to the art of storytelling and not really motivated by capital, but it's nice to get a little bit of money here and there. To be known as an author is an individual dedicated to the art of marketing, showcasing their work, promoting it, and all of that, which is, fine. And each pathway has its own trials and hurdles and tribulations. But I definitely feel, and you may have some thoughts on this, that for, debuting authors who have the mentality like, oh, my book's going to be the New York Times bestsellers, like automatically, and go around the second route, are going to realize a harsh truth. And that is, there is no guarantee that your debut novel is going to guarantee your legacy. Yes. There are exceptions to that rule. There are exceptions, of course. I've actually met quite a few authors whose debut novel allowed them to reach award-winning status, which that is an achievement in of itself. That is not an easy feat to do.
Yeah, exactly.
But generally speaking, you have this roller coaster of highs and lows, and ultimately ties into, the long-term goals you had with this. And another guest who I had on the show, this was a year ago, her her name was Raven White. She's the owner of her own publishing house called Corvid Publishing, which specializes in Gothic horror literature and poetry.
Okay.
Yeah. And she actually brought up a very important discussion to this question, which is for debuting authors, they're always enticed by, what's the newest trend, what's happening in the publishing world, and they want to reach the gravy train. Again, going back to the goals, if you're going to have the mentality, you need to think 5 years ahead and see what's the next trend. Because if you try to write for the trend now, you're not going to get it. And even if you do make it, your audience is going to see your prose and your style of writing is going to be vastly different, and your passion is going to dwindle and die because you're no longer motivated by the art. You're just motivated by trying to get, the money and all of that stuff, which again, going back to the main thing is that there is no guarantee your first book is going to give you the results you want.
Yes, exactly.
Definitely. But it should not deter you from creating new stories if that's truly what you want to do. So Willow, now giving you the question, what is your thought on this? I don't want to say dilemma, but kind of like a topic that needs to be discussed in the publishing world.
So I feel as if ideally you really should have a balance between your passion and your I want to write because I want to write, and the ability to market yourself as an author. Because obviously everyone's goal is, I want to write a bestseller. Obviously that'd be fantastic, but it's not realistic because it's really hard to get to that point. So for me, I hold on to the reason I'm writing. I know what the trends are, and I don't like some of the trends, so I don't write them, but I know what they are. I'm aware. But I also know that at the end of the day, I know the reason I'm writing. I know the themes and the messages that I want to get across and how important they can be to my audience. And that's my goal, is to get those messages across. And the best way for me to do that and reach my audience is to learn how to market myself as an author. And if I don't reach billions and billions of people, I'd love to, but if I don't, if I can just reach that one person who really needs that message that they find in my writing, then I've done my job. But I'm also learning to have that balance of holding on to my passion and also understanding, well, I need to market myself as an author so that I can get my book out there and I can reach those audiences and reach those people who need to read this and need to see these messages. So like I said, you have to have that balance so you're able to, go out and do things like these interviews or have some kind of presence on social media. So if you have fans, they're able to interact and communicate with you. So it's a balance you have to have. I think it can be kind of difficult to find it. I'm still working on finding it because I'm brand spanking new to all of this. But I think it's good to understand the balance between holding on to your passion as an author and being that unique author, and then also being able to market that unique author, not market the trend, market yourself and what you can bring to people.
Definitely. And also to tie into that, it's also really important to network with other people, other authors on social media, because, it's really nice to learn, what they've done and see if that can be applied to you. And there's no bigger place that I've seen for authors, which is, Instagram, with the independent community, which has been, very, very supportive. But then again, going back to one of my guests who brought up a really interesting discussion, and I'm wondering if you've had these encounters on social media, Willow, which is there seems to be this hesitancy. I don't want to say disdain because that's a very strong word, but it definitely seems to be like, this hesitancy for, independent, authors to connect with hybrid authors. And this guest, he didn't have any bad experiences, thankfully, but he did say, generally speaking, there does seem to be this hesitancy where it's like you're either a traditional author, or an indie author. And it's like for hybrid authors, they're sort of like in this middle. They're not fully traditional, but they're not fully independent. So I was wondering if you can share your thoughts on those two things.
So above all, I think that if you are a writer or an author, I believe in supporting everybody who writes, whether you are traditional, hybrid, or indie, because we're all essentially on the same journey. We all have
Mm-hmm.
the same kind of creative world that we're making. And it makes more sense to be kind and support all of those around you than to sit there and say, well, I'm traditionally published, so I am holier than thou. Like I don't believe in that, because I
Right.
think you're traditionally published, it makes so much sense to try and help those around you, because you
Mm-hmm.
have this different experience. Let's help others around us, because everybody has a great story to bring to the table. So I personally am trying to do what I can to be kind and support those around me. I definitely do see a little bit of a disconnect between those who are traditionally published and those who are more of the indie authors. I
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily think that there's actually a big difference besides maybe publicity and sometimes editing. But at
Right.
the same time, if you're trying to get your work out there and doing it independently is the only way you can do it, do it. Get your work out there, because who knows, someday you might have somebody who sees it and is like, this is actually really inspiring. And you can network with that person and bring it to a bigger audience. So I know there's a disconnect. I don't love it. And I suppose I'm trying to do what I can in my own little circle to bridge that gap as best as possible.
All right. And in your own little circle, are there any shout outs you want to give, friends and family, fellow authors you've connected with? And I'm going to actually give the final question a little bit early. What is your word of wisdom that you've learned from the authors that you've connected with that you want to pass on to fellow debuting authors and writers?
So, as far as the shout outs go, of course, those who have my few little followers who have been with me from the beginning. I was recently on the Always Right podcast. I have to shout them out because they're part of the team that I'm working with right now. Author Miss Carissa DeLay has been my mentor, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the fact that she is my friend and that I've met her. She has been wonderful in coaching me in this whole entire journey, teaching me things I never thought to think about. And then her co-host and co-owner of her company, Mr. Jamie Bandera, has also been fantastic. Their podcast has been wonderful. How they are just there to support and educate others. I love it. It is a great thing for you to use as a tool if you're an author who's just beginning. So there's my little bit of shout out, and also my, hey, if you're a debut author, go listen to this podcast because they have so much information to help you. Also, I talked about him before, but my husband, he always gets a shout out because he's my biggest supporter. And then, as far as my advice goes towards other authors who are starting their journey, my biggest bit of advice is a little bit of a two-parter. The first one is just write. Don't sit there and worry so much about what people have to say, because the world is going to tear apart your work no matter what. That's unfortunately what they're very good at right now. But
Right.
you probably are writing something absolutely wonderful and you have something so important to share with people. So just hold on to that. You can worry about criticism later when you're editing. But right now, just get it onto paper. And then in that as well, please also choose to be kind yourself. Choose to network, choose to be kind to your fellow authors. You don't know the kinds of people that you're going to meet and the inspiration that they're going to have for you, or the ties they're going to have to people who are going to become important later down the road. So just choose to be kind to those around you in your journey and share your journey so others can learn from you as well.
Beautifully said, Willow. Poetically said, I must say. And with that, we conclude the full interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to Willow for coming on the show and sharing with us her author's journey, and we wish her the very best with her debut novel. Now, Willow, where can people find and engage with you on social media to stay up to date with the process?
Right now, because social media doesn't like me sometimes, the best way to find me is on Instagram, Willow Grace _writes, and that's WRITES. That is where I'm going to be posting. As soon as I get Facebook to like me, I'll be posting on there whenever that happens. I'm also going to be working on starting a blog so that I can interact with my followers a little bit better. So I'll be posting on there when that happens. But as of right now, Instagram is the best place to find me and to keep updated with everything that happens.
Awesome. I will link that down below in the description of this video. Thank you all very much for joining us for another author's interview here on the channel. Again, a huge thank you to Will for coming on the show. We wish her the very best. And when the book does release, my viewers and listeners, I will come back to this part of the interview and part one and link it down below in both descriptions of the video so you can go and check it out and purchase a copy. And also, most importantly, once you finish reading it, leave a review. Reviews are very, very important to us authors. It is literally a lifeline that helps us grow because, you know, it's not so much the books that we sell, it's literally the reviews that get people interested to buy more books. So review it on our site, post it on Instagram, do like a little blurb everywhere. However you review it and share it, that is very, very important to us. And with that, viewers and listeners, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill, asking you to like and subscribe and comment down below what was your favorite part of the interview. And as always, I wish you a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And until next time, have a wonderful day.